Well, Michael Bociurkiw, Global Affairs Analyst and Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, joins me now from London. Thank you so much for being with us.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
So NATO allies recognise the urgency of stepping up support for Ukraine, but the war-torn nation's most critical Western ally, the United States, is at an impasse with funding for Ukraine stalled in Congress at a time when the country is desperate for additional aid to help fight off intensified attacks from Russia. You wrote in a CNN.com opinion piece that this marks a turning point in the war. What do you mean by that exactly?
Sure. Well, it does represent a big turning point because up until now, and a lot of it is due to just the charisma and the arguments of Mr. Zelensky, is that the West has basically had an open checkbook for Ukraine, because we all thought that a lot of people realized that if Mr. Putin is not stopped in Ukraine, he will go further, whether that's the Baltic states, whether that's Poland or other NATO countries. But I think U.S. legislators especially have succumbed to kind of domestic internal politics. They're trying to play a game of political horse trading with the White House to get what they want in this bill. But Rosemary, I cannot emphasize this enough, that time is not on their side. It's not on Ukraine's side, because as you referenced, those missile strikes from Russia, those drone strikes, are really intensifying and damaging all parts of Ukraine. I mean, right now, the estimate of the reconstruction bill is north of $400 billion. It's getting worse every day. So it's really, really important that the 61 or so billion in US funding be released, and also the 52 or so billion from Europe, here in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, as we mentioned, NATO allies are stepping up military support for Ukraine, aren't they? How critical is that, given it will include up to 1,000 additional Patriot air defense systems, which is exactly what Ukraine needs?
Yeah, it's very, very crucial to helping Ukraine repel these attacks, which, by the way, are not only striking Kyiv, but also key cities like my temporary base of Odessa and Lviv in Western Ukraine. So, but what also Ukraine needs is more artillery, more rockets to fire, because we're hearing reports from the front line of Russian troops having to ration their ammunition when they're firing at the Russian forces. That is a very bad development. The other thing that's happening, Rosemary, is that I think the U.S. and European leaders are trying to find a kind of workaround to this stalled funding. And one of those ways are, of course, that 300 billion or so in frozen Russian assets. There's about 4 or 5 billion of that in the U.S., and the White House seems to be moving ahead to trying to unfreeze that. But here in Europe, there's the bulk, about 190 billion stuck in Belgium alone, in an organization called Euroclear. So the Belgian government is looking at perhaps giving Ukraine about 2.4 billion in taxes from that frozen account that could go to Ukraine and help it with reconstruction and other matters.
And Michael, what are your contacts in Ukraine telling you about the situation right now in the country, and where do they see this war going from here if no additional funding from the US is forthcoming?
Yeah, you know, Rosemary, if you asked me about a year ago, Ukraine as often as I do, I really noticed in the past few weeks a change in sentiment. You know, after almost 2 years of this war, it's expected that people are going to be weary, they're going to be tired. But I'm also feeling that there's a push, for example, for Mr. Zelensky to be a bit more forthright in terms of what are the number of casualties and what is the progress on the front line, because there's a feeling, I think, that he's been sugarcoating quite a bit. The other thing, of course, is a lot of viewers will have heard that there's talk of mobilization in Ukraine. That is being discussed this week. Up to 500,000 men could be mobilized. And talking to people on the streets and to my friends and contacts, they do worry about that, because, you know, they do see in front of their eyes, for example, as I mentioned in that CNN op-ed about cemeteries, military cemeteries growing in size. The casualties on the Ukrainian side after 2 years have been quite heavy as well. So there is a worry, but let there be no mistake, is everybody I speak to in Ukraine realizes that, again, if Mr. Putin is not stopped in Ukraine, he will occupy the entire territory of Ukraine. and go even further, perhaps to the Baltics, perhaps into NATO countries.
Oh, yeah, and talking about the Baltics, because Ukraine's President Zelensky has made a surprise visit to the Baltics. What will likely come out of that trip, do you think?
Yeah, I think this is a real signal that he feels support in the West has been softening, and that he has no better friends than in the Baltic states, because they are, after all, very close to Russia. They know the history, they feel it, and they really do feel that they could be next. But, you know, of course, support their resources rather are quite limited compared to what Europe and the United States could provide. And, you know, just quickly, Rosemary, I think the other thing that's happening, I'm moderating a panel on this tonight here in London, is that there's also a sense that the clock is ticking very, very loudly, not only with the possibility of a Trump character going back into the White House, but many friendly nations to Ukraine flipping in many, many elections this year, and that could change the entire political landscape for Ukraine. So really, urgency is really required here to get that support unlocked for Ukraine.
Michael Bociurkiw, thank you so much for talking with us. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.